You are now tuned into Reppin Sessions podcast. Exclusive interviews with White Oak Roughneck legends. Follow on Instagram and Facebook. Reppin the Roughnecks.
Episode 2, Reppin Sessions podcast. We got the legendary 1971 graduate, Mr. James Marcus Oliver, number 73 for the 1970 semi-finalist team. They went 13-1 in 1970. Got beat by Pflugerville in the semifinals. So, Mr. Oliver, welcome to Reppin Sessions podcast. Great to have you here.
It's great to be here.
Thank you. I posted the episode 1, and James was the first man to respond about it. So when he told me his dad was one of the fellas that Coach Miles talked about, I said, this guy has to get on. We need him on. I'm not going to wait for the building to get done. So how was it playing on that 70 team, man?
It was wonderful. A lot of closeness, and the seniors were real close, and we all got along real well. And in fact, it had really all started back when we were in the 9th grade. We all worked together real hard, and we won district. And Coach Mike Crossland had told us when we were in the 8th grade in the spring that the district coaches in junior high said that Hallsville was going to win. And of course, we all just worked real hard and vowed that we would, we would win. And I wanted to say something about the coaches back then, Coach Mike Crossland and Coach Jimmy Johns. They had a lot to do with the building of the program, as you go on. And that went on back, you trace that on back to Emil Hannicack, the basketball coach. He's the one who got the boys ready, and then Bob Perry helped him until he got out to be a shop teacher and later on counselor. And those guys did a wonderful job. Just like today, one of my very good friends at Gladewater, Scott Clower, he coached in Longview at Foster, and he had those boys ready, and he has them ready at Gladewater along with Derek Floyd. Of course, Mr. Floyd's now principal at the high school. He's not involved, but Scott Clower reminds me a lot of all these junior high coaches that I had, the way he operates and works.
We get into what Coach Miles talked about. Talked about your dad being one of the biggest supporters in town. He said, roll, Roughnecks, roll.
Turn them loose,
Turn them loose. There we go.
Turn them loose, Cotton, and let them roll. Roll, Roughnecks.
Yeah, he said you could hear him all.
Roll, Roughnecks, roll. You can hear him all over the community.
What do you remember most about the playoffs, the 70 team? Like, what sticks out in your head about that season?
Well, the fact that we won 13 games was real memorable.
Yeah.
And just we kept going, and of course, week after week, some weeks we would really be going, and some we wouldn't, and it's like who we were playing. You get up for one school better than you do another, and I really, some of the things I don't want to talk about, because I want to talk about when I have my buddies here in about a week or two.
Absolutely. And in episode 3, we're going to have, I think you said 8 or 9 of the guys.
I know Danny Denton's going to be here. Ronnie Perry's going to be here. Winfred Wilburn has said he would be here. Ronnie Screws McOlin will be here. Bobby Hawthorne will be here. Charles Squeaky Smith will be here. And I hope I haven't left any of the fellas out, but I will. Talking about that 3-year run, really, from the time sophomores on, Danny Denton, Winfred Wilburn, Joe Stevens, and Buddy Coker played as sophomores. They didn't start, but they contributed a lot to the team, and then they all started when they were juniors. And then Ronnie Perry, and I think he started when he was a junior.
Right. What year did you start on varsity? What year?
I didn't start till I was a senior. I had an operation right before the start of my sophomore year, and and I had some other problems when I was a junior, and I just I didn't, I was out there, but I didn't really.
Couldn't go 100%.
Yeah.
So what was it like growing up in White Oak in the 70s?
You talking about cotton? We were sitting. My granddaddy lived right across the street from it, and then of course you got the Roughneck there now, the grocery store, and he had pea field and potatoes and all that. But it was a cold January day, and we sat there with grandmother and granddaddy and my mother, and sit there and watched the van load up for cotton to leave and go to Dallas. Real sad.
Yeah, I could imagine him leaving. Who was your role model? Who'd you look up to that was a previous graduate football player in White Oak? Is there anybody in particular that stuck out to you that you just were a diehard fan?
I like Randy Brent a lot.
Randy Brent?
Randy was on the 62, I won't get this right, 62, 63, 64 team.
Okay,
Of course, I was real little when Roy Bruce died, and Jerry Davis. I've always looked up to Jerry Davis.
So, Roy Bruce, Jerry Davis, all those guys. Do you remember
Bob White?
Bob White. Do you remember when they won state? Were you?
I was there.
You were there.
I was young enough, and I think that we went out to the sidelines in the fourth quarter. I think all this happened. Roy Bruce got loose in the fourth quarter, and we tied the game, I believe. Now, I don't want to make
Do you remember the run at all? Do you remember seeing?
No, I don't. I was too. But we were down on the field because my daddy said, "Well, we'll go down and tell them we had a good year and everything." And then we ended up tying it. Of course, Cotton Miles flipped and got the football, and the football's that white football down here. This is.
Is it in the field house?
Yeah, it's in a trophy case down there. And all the trophies that time period, I believe, and on up in the 70s are down there.
Yeah. So the whole Miles thing, I know your dad was a big supporter. He talked about that.
Yes.
Did your dad, were you old enough to remember your dad ever talking about that situation that Cotton talked about?
Yeah. It over and over and over and over.
So what do you think flipped? Do you think that boat ride changed everything? And
it must have. I didn't know nothing. I always thought that he always told me how great Willie Nose and Cotton Miles were, and Lee Mitchell. I mean, he liked them all, but he always liked Cotton. You know, and my mother never said nothing about it, even after my daddy had passed away. She never said nothing about it. I never knew that he did it, but I imagined it was when White Oak went 5-5. I bet that's what it was.
Yeah, that's what he said, and I asked him, I said, well, what caused them to want to go knock on people's doors? He said, I went 5-5 that year. And I said, well, heck, times have changed.
You know what I told, and I don't care if somebody gets mad, but I told some people that if my daddy was here, had been here from about 1977 on, that a lot of people would have caught it. I would have gone around saying, "Now, Daddy, come on, let's go."
Dad didn't care. He was outspoken, huh?
He was very outspoken.
Great history. The 1970 team. Y'all will probably say it's one of the greatest teams in White Oak. Now the 13 team, I've noticed online, they claim that they're the best team in White Oak. But
the only argument I can give them is they didn't win district. They didn't win district that year. They were a playoff team. If they had been if it had been back in 1970, you can go back and look. ARP in 69, 70, and 71 went 9-1, 9-1, 9-1. Wow. They lost 3 games to White Oak. Didn't make the playoffs. Wow. Of course, today they would be the number 2. They would have been number 2. And also, I can say that they lost 2 games. We didn't lose but 1. So but it's
different era, different time.
Different style offense. And I can tell you, I would have loved to have seen Winfred Wilburn, Bobby Hawthorne, Miles Pruitt, and Buddy Coker playing tight end, running patterns with Mike Barber throwing the ball to him. That would have been a real good situation like we have like they do now. Now they did have a great ball team, and I did go and I did support them. And I was
gonna say, did you go to that semifinals game?
I did go to the semifinals. That was the last game up at Allen before they, closed it down and redid it. I did, and they did have a real good ball team. And I'm not gonna sit here and argue with anybody, but I will say 57, 58, 60, 63, 68, 69, 70, possibly 71, and then that one. 68, 69, 70, 71 were great years. I don't think we've ever had 4 years where we went real deep in the playoffs like we did then. Once to semifinals and 3 quarterfinals.
So what was it like playing with Barber? Now that he went on, y'all got to play with the NFL quarterback at the time and went on to be a tight end. Was he a star back then?
Yeah, he was. Well, he wasn't as big of a star on my team because we had some stars. We had Winford and Joe.
Doesn't Winford still own the record for the most points scored in a career?
Oh, I don't know.
You don't know?
He could.
Yeah.
Winford went on to Louisiana Tech and played defensive back and returned punts.
Oh.
He tried out for the Oilers and he didn't make it, but Winford was real good, and of course the Eddie Guest, the sports writer, called him Winford Whirlaway Wilbur.
Yeah, I saw that in Joe Lee Smith's book. That was his nickname.
Yeah, and Jolton Joe Stevens. They were a tandem. Now Winford got hurt once or twice during our senior year, and but I tell you what.
Who was faster, him or Joe Stevens?
Don't get me lying. Say Winford probably was. Yeah.
Well, on Smokey, they do have it that he is the all-time points leader in White Oak. So I don't know if that still holds or not. So,
but you want to go back and just work through the years. Some of these ball teams I've talked about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, 58. When you don't have but 4 or 5 boys graduating, you're going to be loaded, and they were loaded. And
that was the year they got disqualified, right? Yeah.
And everything Cotton said about it was correct.
Jeez.
And then in 1960, the next year, Russell Waite was a junior, and I think Russell got hurt during the year and missed a few games. But anyway, we didn't win district. And then the next year, we won district. And they went to semifinals, and I'm going to tell you why they're not 13. And they were 12, 1-1, and I'm fixing to tell you why they wasn't.
Yeah.
Well, you had, first of all, I want to talk about some of the people on that team. Yeah. Tommy Arms, Russell, Bobby Hodges was a great center. James King played quarterback. Tommy Hornsby played quarterback some, and they kind of all swapped around. Ronnie Ramlin, Pat Stipes, Rayburn Medlin. I don't want to leave anybody out because I know how it is to get left out. So anyway, that's a few of them on that ball team that they were good. Well, they were rolling along, and I've heard Tommy Arms tell the story. They went down to New London. It was still New London, not West Rusk, and they played New London. But that night, they had a girl that was either sick with leukemia or had died, and New London was fired up. And we ended up tying 6-6. And then I don't think that was one of New London's better teams as far as a good team because we ended up winning the district. And I remember James King, I think, scored on a running. I think he was running around right in. I was up in the stands. A lot of this stuff happened in New London that I'm talking about. So then, they went on. They got in the playoffs, and they were doing real good. They played Shelbyville up here at White Oak. I guess that's probably the last time White Oak played a playoff game in White Oak, in regional.
Wow.
It was in 1960, and we beat them. Then we played Clifton in quarterfinals over in Athens, and everything was rolling along to the last quarter, and we were ahead a couple touchdowns, and Russell Waite limps off. And so he had to get treatment that week, and I don't think he was ready to go that Saturday night. The game was on Saturday night. That's one I didn't go to. My grandmother, Oliver, was real sick. She had cancer, and we didn't know how long she was going to live. She lived on into January. We didn't go. It was a Saturday night, and it was on the radio, and we listened to it. And Russell didn't play. He went out, I think, for the flip and all that. He was a captain. Probably, I don't know who all. I know Tommy Arms was the captain. But we gave them Crosby as who they played. A good shot, and we got beat 14-6, I believe. And that was that. Then the next year, we didn't have a real good ball team. You know, that was just one of those. I think they were 4-5-1, something like that. Then the next year, you had Ben Brent was a senior. That's Randy's older brother. He's a big old tall guy.
What position did he play?
He played split end. So they're rolling along there the first game or two, and they're not playing that well. And so I don't know what happened. Maybe you can get Ben Brent over here to talk real well.
Shout out to Randy. He told me, he said, I'm going to let someone else do the podcast. My memory ain't
Randy
that.
Don't want to do it?
But I'll tell you what.
He ought to be ashamed. He ought to get over here. I'll talk to him.
So if you're hearing this, Randy, you're wanted on the podcast.
Anyway, so we're, things are kind of picking up. New London is the number one team in the state. And so we go down there and play them. It's 0-0 right before the half. So we're sitting up there in the stands, and I said, Daddy, I think I'm going to go down to the concession stand before the half and get me a Coke. So I come out of the stands, and I go around this way, the end zone, and it had been raining that night. I'm going to defend Ben on this. So Randy throws a pass to him, and it's right on Ben Brent's fingertips, and it goes on in the end zone. And up at the cafe, up at the Circle W, in the 70s and the 80s, they gave Ben fits about not catching that ball. But I really don't think he could have caught it, because I think the ball was wet, and the way it was, he was asking me about it, and I said, Ben, I know, because I was on my way to the concession stand. I was closer to you than anybody, any fan, and I saw it. But I teased Ben about it. But anyway, yeah, and then New London scored in the fourth quarter and beat us 6-0. We went on and won the rest of the games. We were 7-3. So guess what? Ben graduates, and a few more that was in that class. Let me see if I got my right sheet here. Yeah, Thomas Grett, Gary Boss, Barney Barrett, Steve Klein, James Sharp, Glenn Skelton. They were all in that class, and they're gone. So the next year, you had Terry Barber, that's Mike's older brother, one of his older brothers. He had two older brothers. Sonny Blue, Johnny Miles, Kenneth Duty, Ronnie McKinney, Butch Drake, Randall Smith, Joe Mike McKinney, Butch Domain, Jody Hilliard, Randy Brent, James McKelvey, Wayne Herron, George Lloyd, Jimmy Owens, James Donald, Smiley Owens, Larry Hare, Jerry Silvertooth, and David Silvertooth, Danny Linder, Ray Alford, Truman Meisner, Bobby Sigmund, Doug Taylor, Cindy McLean, Ray Alford, John McMillan. He had a younger brother that would play later. David Martin, Joe Derwin, Tommy Joe Tuttle, and Danny Linder. And so New London is picked to win state again. And everybody put their money and circle on that October night. We're going to play up here.
Oh.
All right. So we start the season. We're winning. We're slowly creeping up in the polls, and New London's winning. So, along about that time, New London plays Hallsville in Hallsville. Hallsville upsets them 13-12. So it took a little bit of the luster off of this ball game that was going to happen down here. So we get down here. Bailey Marshall was an exceptional coach. You know, he had been Cotton Miles' assistant. And the way they did things was they usually promoted the assistant on up. Bailey, Coach Marshall had done a great job. You know, he wasn't coach but 5 years, but he did a great job bringing these people along, and then he had a fantastic ball team. So at the beginning of the year, every Sunday afternoon, he would turn the projector on and show the last ball game. Well, I got to watching, and Gladewater and New London played, and New London beat them 6-0. And William Sid Bratton, who graduated in the 50s, he was coaching, I don't know, at Sabine or at Judson or somewhere, I think at junior high. I'm telling this for a reason, because he becomes our offensive line coach when I'm a senior. I sat there, and I don't even think Coach Griffin knows this, but I sat there and I would watch Coach Bratton. Of course, we call him Billy Sid because, you know, then he wasn't up here or anything. So he would sit there and study this film. And then he would study White Oak when they played. And then, boy, when he was named coach up here, I said to myself, a light went off. That's why that man was sitting there every Sunday afternoon studying that film. And he was a good history and civics government teacher. I mean, he wasn't like one of these like, you know, we just football coach, we're throwing you in a history class. He knew what he was talking about. He was a good coach too. But he sat there and he studied all this time. And I wanted to bring out Butch Drake. Butch Drake was a little small guy, about 5'6", and I think he played, I don't know if he played cornerback or monster, but the night that White Oak, let me go on and say White Oak beats New London 31-14. Terry Barber had been throwing a halfback pass, Ronnie McKinney, and also to Danny Linder all year. So we roll on, and it gets down to the end of the year. We have 2 games left. White Oak plays, we're going to play over at Hallsville, and that's for everything. They're, I guess, 7 or 8-0, and we're 8-0. But I need to back up and say one more side note on the New London ball game. Van Thomas, and all the old-timers will remember Van Thomas. He didn't like White Oak very much at that time. He was complaining. He said there wasn't enough space in the press box. So Reggie Reynolds, his daddy has the lumber company, and Butch Drake, and I don't know if Randall Smith was in on it, goes down and they built this little outhouse-looking thing and put it on the visitor side, and it said reserved for Van Thomas. Well, myself and Ronnie Perry were at 5th grade. We were at recess, and I said, Ronnie, look down there at that thing on the visitor side. And, of course, that night when we went, it was gone. And so 2 or 3, I think it was a year before COVID, we were up there in the stands, and somebody was talking about a press box, and I said, Reggie, what about that press box that was on the other side? And he started trying to lay it off on Butch Drake. And Butch Drake had worked a lot in the furniture store for my daddy. He was a real kind, nice young man. So, but anyway, Bailey Marshall made him take it down.
So they didn't even get to use it?
Van didn't get on. I don't even think they took a picture of it. But anyway, the next year they enlarged the press box. And
was the visitor side still like how it is today? The tracks behind the bleachers?
The track wasn't here.
Oh, it wasn't?
The track was not here until 66 or 7. I was in the 8th grade, I think, when they built the track. I remember we were in the 8th grade, and Buddy Coker went out for a pass, and somebody threw it. It was a grass tex track, and they had put a layer on it, and he ran into it and slid on that grass tex, and it was kind of an asphalt looking stuff. Got it all over him. I know he'll remember that. I'll bring that about. And I got some stories, you know.
I bet.
You know, but then the Hallsville game, ended up nothing to nothing. You've looked at the records on that, and they agreed, I think. I don't know, but that it wasn't going to be settled by penetrations. It was going to be settled by a flip. White Oak played Judson the next week, and Hallsville played Hawkins. And, of course, White Oak and Hallsville won, and I met in Longview, and they flipped, and White Oak lost the flip of the coin, and then Hallsville went to semifinals and got beat out. And about three or four years there, they did come to life. They beat us in the 50s once. I know they beat us in 65, and then they beat us in the 70s once. We played. That's another story. Fielding Huston scheduled a game. He was at Hallsville. He said he wanted to beat White Oak. And then, lo and behold, Coach Griffin leaves and goes to Bridge City, and Holston comes to White Oak, and he says, well, I guess I'll never get to beat White Oak because he's the coach over here for 2 years. He was a fine gentleman. And he made the statement about Winford and Joe. He says, if there had just been one of them, I could have handled them. But two, I couldn't handle. Because, see, we beat them 4 years in a row. Beat them my sophomore year, my junior year, and my senior year in the regional, but then we beat them in just a regular game. I want to say in 1965, Randy Brin and them came back, and Hallsville had to come over here, and Joe Mike McKinney switched from line to fullback. Doug Sanford was the coach then. Tommy Atkins, that was his first year, and we won district. We beat Hallsville over here 40-6. But going back to Butch Drake, the Sunday after that ball game, White Oak and Hallsville, my daddy was talking to Bailey Marshall, and Bailey Marshall told him, says, that Malone boy, he was running back, says Butch Drake just laid him out. I mean, he tackled him and knocked him out of the ball game. And then that coach told Coach Marshall that his eyes were. Yeah, and then he went back in, but Butch laid a hit on him that night. And I can tell one story on me. I was out there, everybody was holding dummies, and I didn't know I wasn't supposed to let go, and David Silvertooth floored me. Marshall picked me up and drug me over, and I was seeing stars, and he told me when I woke up, he says, I thought I was going to have to go get the smelling sauce. And then, I don't know, for some reason, my mother was a beauty shop operator. She came down to the field, and then he walked out there and he told her what happened. And I thought that was real nice of him to take time, because I was all right. But that's the first time I've ever been out.
Oh.
And I never was knocked out in the
game or anything?
Yeah, okay. One more thing I want to say, because I know you're going to ask me, who was the toughest person I ever went up and practice or any time, and it was Joe Gentry, who was a defensive lineman and also a center on the 1969 team. Joe was just as tough as he could be, and I don't think there was anyone that I went one-on-one with that was any tough. Okay, now go back to Cotton.
We've talked about it off camera before, the whole situation why Cotton left, and it's not really mentioned a lot. Not a lot of people know about the story. So, being you're Mr. Roughneck, you've been around the whole community for a long time. Can we get into that? You want to kind of talk about why Cotton left?
Cotton left
because he mentioned there was a split in the community.
I think there had been one person who had been ineligible earlier in the 50s, and then this comes along, and that burned him up because you're looking at 2 state championships in a row.
Yeah.
And you're looking at one, and that, and he knew he could go anywhere and coach. And he knew he could do the job, and he did the job at Woodrow Wilson, and he did the job at Skyline. But yeah, everything he said, there was a split in the community, and there was people that wouldn't speak to people for years in this community. And there were animosities, and
that's unfortunate.
Some people, were today I hear if you don't have the right name and the right money in the community, I keep hearing that.
I've heard that quite a bit.
I can assure everybody in White Oak, I don't have the money. If they say, well, your granddaddy Satterwhite had plenty of oil, you want to come look at the next oil check and you tell me if I'm getting wealthy for MC Satterwhite. I'm not.
Well, you support like you have. I don't think all that really matters in the long run. So.
You know, I look upon myself as an elder statesman. I'm not going to be running for nothing. I want my school to run everything to go right. If I see a problem, you know, if there's a coaching problem or I think something needs to be done, I have friends. There's friends that got with me that were on that team that was undefeated and tied Hallsville. Friends that were before that on that 60 team. That's how far back I can reach. I can really, you know, reach if I need to. But
so I know you mentioned it before. You said if Cotton wouldn't have left, you truly believe White Oak would have multiple rings, state titles, right?
Yeah. And I haven't really gotten into it, but the saddest I am at looking at all this during my time is 1966 and 67. We had a coach, Bobby Williams, and what I saw, I didn't like. And I didn't like the fact that he had a sophomore trying to split the block between Johnny Klein, who grew up right across here, Johnny Klein and Mike Warren. Both of those fellas wound up their senior year having operations. So many people that got hurt when they were a sophomore. Jim Goss was a sophomore in 67 on the 67 team, and he separated his shoulder. I mean, we had one inch. We had two or three that had shoulder separations, and you know, and it just you had the operations. And back then, when you had an operation, you were done. I know Mike Warren did, and Johnny Klein did, and I think Johnny Klein got to come back and play basketball. And then you had 3 or 4 All-State. You had, I know, on the 67 team, Johnny Klein and Tony Pite was a center, and Mike Warren. You know, and the talent was there. I mean, they was big old boys, way over 200 pounds. Jeez. And I thought 66 and 67 that we should have. Hallsville won district in 66, and they came over here and played White Oak. White Oak upset them. We didn't have nothing on the line. I think Raymond Owens, who was Smiley Owens' brother, he also was a tough young. He played on the defensive line, but he was real small, about like Butch Drake and Bowie McMillan, and some of those that I named that were real small. He was real tough. One of the toughest players that White Oak ever had. Anything else about Cotton? They just, you know, it was just. And I think some of that went on for years. And, you know, if you were certain. It wasn't money. If you had a certain name, or if this one, you know.
So that's been going on a while then, in White Oak.
But now all that part is over.
Yeah.
You know, because all those people are gone. Yeah, that did go on for a while. And anybody that wants to say it didn't, it did. Yeah.
Who's one player in White Oak you just really enjoyed watching?
Well, I like to watch the McCurdy boys.
Jansen?
Yeah, and his brother. I like to watch them. Becky taught my daughter up here, and she used to live around the corner from us, and I always enjoyed. I'd see them out playing and everything, and enjoyed watching him, and I can't think of the brother's name. Did you want to go back and talk about Jerry Davis and more?
We can, wherever you.
Jerry Davis is just a wonderful person. You talk to him.
I've gotten to speak to him. Real nice guy.
And my daddy called him Jerry Lou Jack, because Johnny Lou Jack was at Notre Dame. I mean, he'd holler at him and give him fits and everything. And of course, he's going to tell you when you get him on here how he got the name Coon Eye. I'm going to let him. I'm going to. I want to talk about Cotton. I'm in Roy Bruce and going back up. I want to talk about my coaches, and then but there's a lot of stuff I haven't said on here because I know that we're going to be back to it.
Yeah.
I don't want to. I want to talk about an actual game. Going back to Roy Bruce, he was, like you said the other day, he was a beast, and just wonderful to me because I guess he knew my daddy liked him, and Freddy Sutton told me a couple years before he died that Daddy was up there in Gregton, and he had a football, and he was running and laughing and hollering at Jerry, not Jerry, but at Roy Bruce and Freddie. Freddie was outstanding too. And then so it goes on, and like I say, Cotton leaves. And
How upset was your dad when he left?
very upset. Yeah, my daddy was very upset. In fact, my daddy said that Blaine Catfish Smith, who was a freshman coach at Baylor and had coached at Longview a long time, because he said that he thought he was the one that got P.C. Cobb hooked up with Cotton. He told me, he says, if I'd have known that, I'd have asked him what happened when Waddy Myers came to town. Now, all the old people know Waddy Myers was the head coach at Texarkana, and Longview had a tough time with Texarkana when they were both in the same district for a long time. Anyway, so Cotton leaves, and, Daddy's distraught, and we're all down here. We always went to the football games road with Jimmy Cox. We called him Big Jimmy because he was a senior. He worked for Atlantic Richfield, and then he ended up moving to Tyler. And he sent his other son, Charles, to Pine Tree because he was right up there on the hill close to where Roy Bruce got killed. And there was a big controversy about were they in our district, in the school district or not.
Oh, if Roy's family was?
No.
Oh.
Cox.
Oh, okay.
And so Jimmy had graduated. Jimmy was a real good basketball player too. An all-star game, and and he went on, and he lives in Austin. I still can't find him though. Tried. And then so anyway, Roy Bruce had a big heart. He's always, when I was down at the swimming pool, he'd work as lifeguard, and he'd take care of me and everything. And then I guess it was the summer of 1960. We saw him on the side of the road working on his car, and Daddy pulled up and asked him, could we help him? He said no. I know he had a screwdriver, he got it fixed and went on. And we never saw him again. And then all that happened, and Mr. Fred Matney, who was a big supporter of the Roughnecks, was talking. Roy Bruce, you couldn't go a football season if you had somebody, back in that time period, didn't bring Roy Bruce's name up at a football game. And he got to telling, he says, yeah, Don Hunter, he ended up owning the gas station that Fred Matney owned. Fred Matney got out and started barbecuing. He says, yeah, Don Hunter was sitting over here when that car came by. Evidently they came back up through White Oak and came across where McDonald's is and took a left. He says he just put his head between his hands and cried because he knew him and everybody liked him and everything. And so, and then I think I told you off when I first met you that the day of the funeral, my mother was a beauty operator, and she was working, and my daddy came in, and he says, we got to get ready to go to the funeral. And Green Bay was playing in their first NFL championship game against Philadelphia in Franklin Field. And I looked up, and they snapped the ball to Max McGee. He was the punter for the Packers that year, and he just took off, and he got a first down. And so I said, no, Daddy, I don't stay here. I wanted to stay there and watch
Max
McGee play, and Daddy wouldn't let me. So I've always said that day, one White Oak hero was laid to rest, another one really came to life as a star.
Wow.
And it was sad, and I told you that we were walking to after the service at Welch. We went to Lakeview. Lakeview, I don't think had been there very long. We were walking down to the gravesite, and we were with the Coxes, and Jerry Davis came up and said, Mr. Oliver, what are we going to do? And then Jerry told me in one of my phone calls with him that his daddy kind of eased him on up away from the grave after it was over. And I asked Jerry, I said, well, of course, Jerry was at TCU too. I said, were you left with packing his stuff up and everything? He said, no. They were nice enough that everything was gone when I got up there semester. So
they were roommates too?
I think so.
Yeah.
I asked Jerry about that. But they were real close. Like I told you, he was in Jerry's wedding. And Jerry told me that one of the coaches told him that he was probably going to start the next year at linebacker at TCU.
We've talked about it and we have a plan. We won't really discuss it, but getting 22 retired.
Yeah.
That jersey number definitely needs to be retired in White Oak. So
yeah, I remember. I told you that Freddy Sutton, he hollered at me one night. Sometimes he didn't say a word to me, but he says, "What are they doing out there wearing number 22? That's supposed to be retired, isn't it?" To me, and I says, "I thought it was."
I know you said for a while that no one wore it.
Nobody wore it
Yeah.
for a long time. I mean, they might. I don't even think that in the late. I don't see any 22 on here.
Yeah.
And that's 70. I don't. If they did, they started wearing it in the 80s. That's what I'm going to think.
Yeah, and I know there was someone that wore it last year, and then there's been some others, but yeah, it definitely should be retired.
Yeah.
All-time rushing leader in White Oak. 60 years later, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
So.
And like Cotton couldn't have said it any better. 5A running back, or 4A at that time, 4A in a Class A. I remember him running in 58 real good. I was a little bit younger. He didn't make All-State. We were. That was cut off. No, that was just horrible. In other words, the kids got punished. Say what you want to. It's always every time I go in to teach or something, it's all about the kids. The kids are the ones that get punished. But I tell you what, Coach Griffin made sure that we had to bring our birth certificates up there, and they kept them on file till about May 15th before we graduated. I guarantee you, there wasn't no slip-ups there.
What else do you remember from the 70 season that really stood out? Is there a certain game that you look back and that proud to be a Roughneck? And I know you're proud to be a Roughneck, but is there a certain game that you look back and you always remember more than any on that season?
Lord, there's West Rush game, Spring Hill game, the Arp game, the by-district, regional, quarterfinals, and finals. There's about 4 or 5.
How bad y'all beat Spring Hill that year? Do you remember?
34-0. But I mean,
was the rivalry as bad as it is today back then?
But I won't talk about that with the boys.
Yeah, we'll save that for the 70 episode 3 podcast.
I wanted to go back and say one more thing about Cotton. I told you that a year or so passed, and so I think when White Oak had that 4-5-1 team, Cotton was having his first good team at Woodrow Wilson, and Daddy said it's a Friday night, Friday afternoon, he says, let's go up and watch Cotton tonight. And so PC Cobb Stadium is where American Airlines is now. And so we load up and we go up there. About that time, we get up in the stands and game starts. And We're on the Woodrow Wilson side, and Daddy jumps up, and play or two happens. He says, "Turn them loose, Cotton. Let them roll." Cotton turns around and has a big old grin on his face.
He knew exactly who it
who was in the stands. And then after the game, we went down to the field and we talked to him. And again, Cotton has got to be one of the luckiest coaches, winning. He beat Sundown on penetrations, and Jerry was talking about how Phil McFarland threw a lead block to spring Roy Bruce on a big run in that game. And anyway, he won on penetrations there. He flipped for the football, and then he goes up here and he plays, and they're tied on penetrations, and he wins on first downs and goes on to the next round. And then, so he went to semifinals once, I think in 69, with Woodrow Wilson. He went once with Skyline. You see, he had two more shots, and he, like I say, he was, but you want to go on back to, I'll just talk him in about 68. Coach Griffin was a man with a plan. Organized. He knew what he wanted to do, and he let his coaches coach, but he would make the final decision. He always did, and I think we won 11. I think we were 11-0-2, and we lost. We tied Rosebud Lot, played them in Texarkana, and they won on penetration 6-5, 27-27. They had us down at the half, but that was a real good ball team. Vince Edmondson, Kenneth Bedford, Terry Williams, Sam Hunt. Sam Hunt is another one of those that went to the NFL. He played middle linebacker and he played fullback. He went to Stephen F. and then to the New England Patriots. And let's see, who else? Roy Berry, Billy Berry, Kevin McFarland, Ricky Woods, Joe Gentry, Jim Goss, Chuck and David Silvertooth, and Bill Smith, Larry Smith, and I know I'm leaving Tim Davis. Don Herron was quarterback. He was one that played quarterback for 2 or 3 years, and he was real good. And then the next year, my junior year, you had seniors. You had Jim Goss, Charlie Owens, Lewis Bickett, who was my cousin. And in fact, a while ago when I told you about the guy that Coach had trying to split those two big boys, that was my cousin. He was a sophomore. He ended up quitting. He didn't play, and then he didn't play when he was a junior, and he decided he wanted to play. So he comes out, because Coach Griffin always had everybody go through all season. He played his senior year. But anyway, so Lewis, Charlie Owens, Rick Wood, I'm trying to think, John Griffin, he was on that other team too. He was a senior. And Chuck Silvertooth, Bowie McMillan, Joe Gentry. I think I've pretty much got the people on that team, and then Bowie, Rick Wood, Jim. So that was pretty much, there was, in other words, it was another situation where there were 5 or 6 or 7 seniors. They left, and then here we come, there's 12 of us. And but anyway, they had a good ball team. They were more of a defensive ball team. And I don't know who you'll get from that class. I'll sit down on any of these ball teams and talk.
Yeah.
If any of them want me, but I'm sure they won't. So anyway, what happened was we were playing Mark. The team we played and tied for state champion, and it was 1969. Again, we had Winford and Joe. Again, Jim Goss got hurt his junior year, messed his knee up against Paul Pewitt. Didn't play against Rosebud. Senior year, he messed his knee up against Paul Pewitt again, he only kicked extra points against Mark. He stood on the sidelines and kicked extra points because he was hurt. And with the knee, get corrected, you know why. So it rained. And Mark has all these big running backs, these big, slow power backs. And they just fell right into it. It was a wet surface. We took a 7-0 lead. They came back and they scored twice and beat us 12-7. But of course, they were thankful for a wet field because with a dry field, you would have Bowie and Winford and Joe and all of them running wild. And, you know, in other words, it just killed our speed that night. So that was that year. And then, you know, 2 years later, not my senior year, but the next year, Barber's Hill had to come up here and play in old Lobo Stadium because there's a rule that if you play somebody in a playoff game and they flip and you go way down wherever, they wouldn't come to Coach Griffin tried to get them to come to Livingston, Liberty, Nacogdoches, Lufkin. They want no part of it. Well, they're not going to come up there, so they flipped. And I think Coach Griffin said we had Kilgore and they had Deer Park Stadium. Again, that's for the next time because of that. You know, I want to get. You know, I'm going to tell y'all that everybody out there would listen. Coach Bratton was at his finest moment at the halftime. I will say that. That we had 2 first downs and 20 yards total offense at the half.
I'm sure.
I'll tell you later. So anyway, the next year they had to come up here, and I'm going to tell this story, and then the next year they came up here, but it was about the middle of the year we had beat I was coming out of a Friday class at Kilgore College, and there was this girl standing there, and she was in one of my other classes. And I said, she was taking a test early. Can you tell me about this test that we're going to take, I believe, Monday or Tuesday? And she says, yeah, but I got to hurry up. My brother's coming up. He's a coach. He's got to come up here and scout. I says, who's he going to scout? And she says, White Oak. And I said, where's he from? She says, Barber's Hill. And I thought, golly, started counting the games until White Oak would play Barber's Hill. It was 6 or 7 games. And so
they were scouting them already.
Because White Oak was going to be waiting on them. And, you know, and I liked it. I think I told Coach Griffin the next week or two that they were scouting. So, and
that's crazy. So where did y'all play Pflugerville out in that semifinal game?
We played in Temple. They went to Waco, and Floyd Casey, the field had already been torn up to put in AstroTurf. Play there, and they looked at some high school fields, and they weren't in good shape. And Coach Griffin, I don't think he wanted to play at Athens or Corsicana because we had lost the 2 previous years there. And, of course, I'm sure he didn't want to play in Athens because the drainage was bad. You know, it's not like it is today. If it rained, we'd be in for it again. Again, Pflugerville was one of those teams that they didn't throw that much. They ran the ball and opportunistic.
How was it losing? I mean,
heartbreak. I think we had the better team. And then Pflugerville got beat by Sonora, and they got beat bad. And, of course, all we heard, well, y'all better be glad y'all didn't play Sonora. And, of course, you know, I said, no. I said, we would have loved to play Sonora. And I think we were going to play at Memorial Stadium in Austin the next Saturday afternoon, because I think that was during the time when they were working on the stadium and the lights weren't, you know, you had to, if you were going to play a ball game, you had to play about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Coach Griffin was a good man, and if anything went wrong, he protected his players. He tried to help them and the best he could, and and he, you know, if there's any flack, in other words, he's what I would try to do with student of mine. If somebody got after him, if there's something that happened, he would try to take the blame. I mean, he's a fine Christian man, and he was, you know, real good, and he was a good coach. He was the right coach at the right time for us, for all us boys. And then Coach Atkins was wonderful, and we had him in health, and the boys took it from him the first semester. The girls took it from Miss Atkins the second semester, and Coach Atkins got us in there, and he said, "Now, boys," he says, "I know y'all were in the 9th grade when we had a little demonstration up here at the school. We had 3 seniors when I was a freshman, got down below the tennis court and started drinking about 3 o'clock in the morning, and then they went up to take their health test. They were going to graduate, and up and asked him a question, and he went back and sat back down, and then another one came up, and he goes, and he started calling them back. And I'm not going to call their names because they live here. And so he had 3 of them, taking them going down the hall to the principal's office. And he says, "These boys have been drunk," threw them in there. And so the principal carried them over to the superintendent's office, and one of them threw up. The superintendent said, "Get them out, get them out." And they graduated. I guess they thought we better get them on down the road. And but anyway, that was, you know, he loved to talk about that, and he'd talk about different stuff and everything. And I'll have a story about him next.
Got a story about Coach Griffin next time?
Hello, Jamie. That's my daughter. What you doing?
Huh?
What you doing, honey?
I'm driving home. I was good.
You know what? I'm doing the podcast right now.
Sorry, you just should have answered.
That's okay.
No.
That's okay.
Hey, are y'all coming down Friday? Was that?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Well, tell Sanders at the Hoss at the Tooth Fairy. I'll get in touch with the White Oak Tooth Fairy, and I'll have his money when he gets here Friday. Okay?
Okay, I just thought you'd think I was funny that he wrote the letter. He said, "I'll still take the money."
Well, I'll call you in a little bit. I love you. Okay?
All right, love you too.
Oh, this is a tape running. This is a funny story about that. When they started to get married, he's from Baytown.
Okay.
See, we played Barber's Hill in Deer Park, right by Baytown. And I said, I done made this trip once, and I'm not going back down to Baytown for a big ball game wedding. I said, we'll meet him halfway. They got married in Nacogdoches. So anyway, and they lived in one of those little cities outside of Tyler. She worked in Jacksonville. Then they moved to, I can't think of the name of the town, but you go to Buc-ee's and take a left and go 15 miles. Crandall.
Okay.
And then they're in Melissa now. No, she'd live down here if she could make as much money teaching. She's does dyslexia. She's in the elementary.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Okay, now what was we talking about? Coach Griffin.
Coach Griffin. Yes, sir.
And then I said something about Coach Atkins. You know, I done talked about Coach Bratton, and I talked about Jimmy Johns and Mike Crossland. So you want to talk about
Any other stories?
I was in playing defense against Barber's Hill, and evidently we stopped them. And 3 or 4 years before, we had a boy when I was a freshman. It's always when I was a freshman. Anyway, this boy got knocked out 3 or 4 times and had to be helped off the field. So I got out there, and I'm just going to tell it like it is. I got kicked in the balls. I'm laying out there, and the first thing that flashed in my mind, boy, and I got up and I started coming off the sideline, and so I got over there, and Coach Atkins was talking to me, praising me, and everything. And then he says, "What's the matter? Did kick you in the family jewels, and then he slammed me down. It was an iron beam, and I thought, oh no, here we go again. And he didn't realize what he was doing. Coach Atkins, when I got up and came off, I was thinking about that boy 3 or 4 years ago, and he just busted out a big grin. And of course, again, Coach Griffin and Coach Bratton, they didn't know. You know, they weren't there. They weren't coaches there at that time. It was this other guy I mentioned.
I guess we'll save a lot of the. You want to save a lot of the stories.
I want to save a lot
with
of the
the teammates, because we are going to do episode 3 with the 1970 team, like we mentioned earlier. So that's going to be really exciting. And then from there, hopefully the studio will be finished so we can get everything rolling. So I have about 30 to 40 people lined up right now, but I wanted to get you in here.
Hard enough that if he played somebody like Arp and he wanted the ball control, we'd jump in the wishbone. I mean, that was
Yeah, I bet if Barber was playing in today's time, he'd probably pass for way more yards than what he did for in his career. So.
Yeah, well, see, we didn't, we might pass 10, 15 times a game. Yeah. We didn't have to, because we had end arounds and all tight end double traps and all kind. And another thing about Coach Griffin, if you were in the game and you came out, and when we were playing Paul Pewitt, I told him, I says, I can gap block that boy all night. And I'll tell a little bit about the boy that I was blocking. Says I can hit him. Coach, I can knock him back down toward the center. So he sent me in there with a gap play, and he handed to Winford on about the 3-yard line. Winford walked into it. So he listened to people. He was a smart man and a good coach.
Really enjoyed our time. We'll have a lot more for you guys. Episode 3, and sit down and really get some stories out so y'all can hear their side and how it was for them with their time in White Oak. So, any last words for us, Mr. Oliver, before we shut this episode 2 out?
No. Well, I think that my senior year, we got to renew the rivalry with Hallsville. And I didn't tell the fact that Hallsville brought their band to the scrimmage, and that stirred it up a little bit more. And I blocked one of them, and Coach Bratton, the coaches were on the field of the scrimmage. He says, get up, get somebody else. And then so the next night, Coach Griffin, we're having a kickoff supper, and he walks up. He says, I didn't know I was getting into a hornet's nest when I went over there. I said, well, Coach, we've been at them for a long time. Saying we had beat them when we were freshmen, saying we hadn't seen them for 3 years. It all started, and then we went down to West Rusk, and I've got a good Bobby Hawthorne story to start that ball game off.
Good
with
deal.
It didn't have nothing to do with playing the game.
A little bit of drama before.
He was the sports editor for the Gager. I'll just say that he wrote something that came back to haunt.
I can't wait for that story. So, looking forward to it, James. It's been a pleasure.
Been a pleasure.
Yes, sir. And we'll wrap this one up. Episode 2, Reppin Sessions podcast.